The American Civil War had ended, but the nation it left behind was not healed. Cities were swelling beyond their limits. Railroads were slicing through the wilderness. Factories thundered through the night, forging steel, printing newspapers, spinning textiles, minting fortunes. America was growing faster than its laws, faster than its institutions, faster than anyone could understand. But beneath the noise, beneath the smoke, beneath the clanging of steel, something else was beginning to rise. A thick, black liquid. It seeped through the ground. It soaked into wooden barrels. It stained clothes and burned skin. It ignited with the slightest spark and could turn an entire town into an inferno. Oil. To most Americans in the 1860s, oil was chaos, dangerous, unstable, unpredictable. Drillers died. Wells collapsed. Refineries exploded into towering fireballs. Prices jumped violently. Fortunes made in hours, lost in minutes. But in the midst of this explosive chaos, one man remained frighteningly calm. Where others saw danger, he saw structure. Where others saw luck, he saw mathematics. Where others saw a gamble, he saw a system waiting to be mastered. That man was John Davison Rockefeller. But long before he built the richest empire in American history, he was just a quiet boy growing up under the shadow of a man neighbors whispered about. A man known across small towns and dirt roads as Devil Bill. Rockefeller's father was a traveling salesman, a charming liar with a medicine bottle in one hand and a scam in the other. He sold fake cures, borrowed money without repaying it, vanished into new towns under new names. He lived a double life, sometimes a triple one. From this man, young John learned the harshest lessons first. Waste nothing, trust cautiously, and never let emotions interfere with money. His mother, Eliza, was the opposite. Devout, disciplined, fiercely frugal. She held the family together with a quiet strength. No luxury, no excess, every penny accounted for, every decision justified. She didn't just raise children, she trained minds. And John absorbed it all. He grew up believing that every coin held a story, that money flowed like a river, that fortunes weren't accidents. They were built through control, discipline, and structure. At 16, he got his first job, a bookkeeper, earning 50 cents a day. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charismatic. He didn't chase attention. He watched. He observed wasteful clerks, careless managers, useless expenses. He learned how a business lived and where it bled. He filled notebook after notebook, tracking every cent he earned and spent, a habit he carried for the rest of his life. He was quietly studying the anatomy of money. And then, America discovered oil. In Pennsylvania, a drill struck a pocket of rock oil and unleashed a geyser that shot into the sky. Newspapers called it the miracle of the age. Speculators rushed in. Farmers abandoned fields to chase fortunes. Whole towns erupted overnight. Oil fever had begun. But Rockefeller didn't join the frenzy. He didn't gamble on wells or chase rumors of new strikes. He waited. He watched. He analyzed. And then he saw it, the flaw everyone else missed. Oil drilling was unpredictable. Refining it was not. If drilling was chaos, refining was structure. Rockefeller realized he didn't need to search for oil, he needed to control what happened after oil was found. So he partnered with a chemist
and built a small refinery in Cleveland, but what he built inside those walls was unlike anything in the entire country. Where rival refineries leaked oil onto the floor, Rockefeller installed systems to capture every drop. Where others dumped waste into rivers, he distilled it into sellable byproducts. Where others burned leftover gas, he found buyers. Where one refinery saw waste, Rockefeller saw revenue. Every problem became a profit center. Every inefficiency became an opportunity. Every drop mattered. But this was only the beginning. As Rockefeller expanded, he noticed something far more important than refining. The real power wasn't in oil. It was in moving oil. Railroads were America's arteries, transporting coal, wheat, steel, and now barrels of crude and kerosene. But their pricing system was a labyrinth of corruption and inconsistency. Most businessmen complained about it. Rockefeller studied it.
He analyzed freight tables, tariff structures, volume schedules. He found gaps, loopholes, inefficiencies, cracks in the system big enough to swallow entire companies. And then he did something that would change the course of American capitalism. He negotiated secret contracts with the major railroads, exclusive rebates, discounted freight rates, and guaranteed shipping deals that no competitor could match. This wasn't illegal. It was leverage. Rockefeller had found the pressure point of the industry, and he squeezed. His competitors' transportation costs were higher than his total cost of refining. He could sell kerosene at a price that wiped them out and still make a profit. Some called it predatory. Some called it genius. But the truth was simple. Rockefeller understood the system better than anyone alive. Refineries collapsed. Owners surrendered. Some resisted, but resistance crumbled under economics stronger than iron and steel. Rockefeller didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't brag. He simply outstructured everyone. The fewer players in the market, the more efficient his empire became. The more efficient it became, the cheaper kerosene grew. The cheaper it grew, the more America relied on him. Consumers benefited. His rivals evaporated. And Standard Oil tightened around the nation like the gears of a perfect machine. One by one, America's oil cities, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, fell under his control. Pipelines, tank cars, barrel factories, shipping networks, distribution hubs. Every stage of oil's journey passed through Rockefeller's hands. And as the machine grew, America began to whisper. How much power was too much power? How far could one man go in controlling the lifeblood of a nation? What happens when efficiency becomes dominance, and dominance becomes monopoly? Rockefeller ignored the noise. He reorganized. He expanded. He refined. Quiet, calm, relentless. He wasn't building a company. He was building a system that would outlive all its competitors. By the late 1870s, Rockefeller's machine had grown so vast, so precise, so ruthlessly efficient, that the rest of the industry began to choke under its weight. Refineries that once boasted independence were now begging for deals. Railroads that once dictated terms were now dependent on the steady river of oil flowing from Rockefeller's empire. And competitors, men who once dreamed of riches, now whispered that Standard Oil was becoming something no one had ever seen before. Not a company, not a corporation, an organism, a living, breathing financial entity that stretched across states, across borders, across the very arteries that powered America's economy. Its pipelines were veins. Its refineries were organs. Its distribution networks were nerves. And at the center of it all, calmly, silently, was John D. Rockefeller. But power, in any age, invites fear. America began to change its tone. Newspapers that once praised Rockefeller's efficiency now questioned his dominance. Politicians who had ignored Standard Oil now accused it of crushing competition, manipulating transportation costs, controlling markets. They couldn't see inside the machine, so they assumed it hid something monstrous. Rockefeller didn't respond. He didn't defend. He didn't attack. He simply kept building. With every year, Standard Oil added new layers, more subsidiaries, more partnerships, more pipelines, more tankers. Dozens of companies knitted together under a single logic: control the supply, control the cost, control the outcome. This structure was so advanced that even financial experts struggled to map it. Money moved through subsidiaries like current through wires. Profits disappeared into accounting structures only Rockefeller understood. He could adjust prices at will, and competitors could do nothing about it. But the dominance brought tension. Small businessmen rallied against him. State governments opened investigations. Journalists began exposing the shadowy deals and private rebates. Among them was a woman whose work would shake the foundation of his empire, Ida Tarbell. Her father had once been crushed by Standard Oil's tactics. She never forgot it. Now she published a series of articles that peeled back the layers, the secret agreements, the railroad pressure, the quiet acquisitions. America read her words with shock. To many, Rockefeller was no longer a brilliant strategist. He was the shadow in the corner of the room. And yet, he stayed calm.
Because beneath the public outrage, he could feel the truth. The oil industry had become dependent on him. Kerosene prices had dropped by nearly 80% because of Standard Oil's efficiency. Quality had risen. Supply had stabilized. Rockefeller could see the bigger picture. If America wanted cheap light, safe fuel, and economic stability, it needed Standard Oil. But the U.S. government didn't see stability. It saw a threat. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, a law built to confront giants. And there was no giant bigger than Rockefeller. For the first time, the machine felt heat. But even then, Rockefeller didn't panic. He began restructuring Standard Oil from the inside, creating trusts, creating layers, scattering ownership across states. Where investigators built cases, he built new walls. Where prosecutors traced money, he redirected it. Where lawmakers tried to break lines of control, he rewired them. It was a chess match, but not between equals. Rockefeller had been preparing for this for years. Still, pressure mounted. Courts demanded documents, senators demanded testimonies, banks grew uneasy. Competitors celebrated what they thought was the beginning of his fall. And for the first time, Rockefeller began to feel the weight of his own success. He had built an empire on discipline so extreme it separated him from the world. He worked with mathematical calm while America spiraled into anxiety. He walked through cities knowing almost every lamp burning at night was his doing, and yet he remained a public villain. The man who lit America had become the man America feared.
But the machine kept running. Standard Oil was now so integrated, so interconnected, so deeply woven into the nation's economic fabric that even Rockefeller couldn't stop it if he wanted to.
His creation had grown beyond him. Every day, barrels moved, pipelines hummed, tankers crossed oceans, refineries fired through the night. Standard Oil wasn't just part of America's economy. It was the backbone of it. But the storm kept growing. By the early 1900s, nearly every state attorney general had filed a case against Standard Oil. Investigations multiplied. Politicians used Rockefeller as a symbol of corporate greed. Newspapers printed his silhouette like a villain in a dime novel. Still, Rockefeller walked each morning with quiet discipline, counting his steps, timing his meals, recording his expenses. He wasn't worried about losing control. He was worried about something else. That the country didn't understand what would happen if Standard Oil collapsed. America wasn't ready to face a world without the system he built. And then, after years of litigation, hearings, accusations, and national debate, the final blow came. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court delivered its ruling. Standard Oil must be dismantled, broken apart into 34 independent companies. When the news hit the public, the reaction was instant. Crowds cheered, headlines screamed victory, politicians announced a triumph for democracy. Standard Oil had fallen. But in Rockefeller's quiet New York home, there was no panic, no anger, no despair.
Only a small, calm smile. Because John D. Rockefeller understood something the rest of America didn't. He had built Standard Oil with mathematics, but he had built his wealth with foresight. He owned a quarter of the shares across the entire empire, and when Standard Oil shattered into pieces, each piece became its own company. Each company gained independence. Each company's value exploded. Rockefeller didn't lose a monopoly. He gained 34 thriving investments. And in one of history's greatest ironies, the attempt to destroy his wealth made him richer than ever before. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Marathon, Conoco. They didn't rise from the ashes. They were the ashes, and they lit the world on fire for the next century. Rockefeller had built a machine of such precision that even breaking it only multiplied its power. And for America, this was only the beginning. When the Supreme Court destroyed Standard Oil, America believed it had clipped the wings of a giant. But for Rockefeller, something unexpected began to happen, something even he had not fully anticipated. The noise of the courtroom vanished. The political fury dissolved. The public excitement faded. And into that silence, for the first time in decades, Rockefeller heard something he had long ignored: his own thoughts. His empire was gone, at least in structure, but his wealth, his systems, his influence had grown larger than ever before. And with the machine now running without him, something inside him shifted. It wasn't fear, it wasn't regret. It was a question that had been buried under years of discipline, efficiency, and battle. If I no longer need to build, then what am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? For a man who measured days like ledger entries, the idea of open time was foreign, empty. He was in his early 70s, richer than any human alive, yet suddenly, without a battlefield, without a machine to tune, without an empire to manage.
But nature abhors a vacuum, and so did Rockefeller's mind. And within that quiet space, he began to see something new. America didn't just need oil. It needed order, structure, systems. and he could build those too. Not in refineries, but in hospitals, laboratories, classrooms, and entire communities. Rockefeller had spent a lifetime eliminating waste from industry. Now he wanted to eliminate waste from society. And so began the Second Empire, an empire not of oil, but of philanthropy engineered like a business. He approached giving with the same precision he brought to Standard Oil. No emotional improvisation, no random charity. Everything required structure, accountability, measurable output. He created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, America's first modern biomedical lab. Its mission was simple: cure diseases by understanding them at the cellular level. In an era when doctors still relied on intuition and outdated practices, this was revolutionary. He funded the General Education Board. Its purpose? Modernize Southern schools, train teachers, and improve the country's weakest educational systems. He launched a nationwide campaign against hookworm, a parasite so widespread in the American South that entire communities were too weak to work. Within years, infection rates dropped dramatically. Rockefeller understood something long before governments did. Disease is an economic problem, disguised as a medical one. If people are sick, society becomes inefficient. If society is inefficient, the nation loses productivity. And inefficiency, to Rockefeller, was the enemy of civilization. His donations were massive, but never reckless. He demanded reports, audits, outcomes. He treated philanthropy like investment, each dollar placed where it maximized human return. But outside these institutions, the public still struggled with his reputation. For decades, Rockefeller had been painted as a villain, the man who destroyed competitors, the man who manipulated railroads, the man who controlled the nation's lifeblood.
Yet now, something strange was happening. As he aged, his severity softened. Reporters began seeing him not as a ruthless magnate, but as an old man walking through his garden with a cane and a straw hat. Children approached him for coins, and he gladly handed out dimes with a smile. People began sending letters asking for advice. He responded with short notes of scripture or humor or encouragement. His generosity, once strategic, became personal. It was not a reinvention. It was an evolution. He had lived through a storm of criticism. He had been dragged through courts, demonized in the press, and targeted by politicians. But now, in his twilight years, Americans began to see him clearly as a man whose success was built not on luck, but on principles that could outlast any attack. Discipline, structure, patience, and an almost obsessive commitment to efficiency. But history had another twist waiting for him, one that would prove the true power of his systems. Because while Rockefeller focused on medical science and education, the world outside was changing faster than ever. A new machine was rising. It wasn't a refinery or a pipeline. It was the automobile. Gasoline, once a useless byproduct Rockefeller nearly threw away, suddenly became the fuel of the century. Every car needed it. Every city demanded it. Every industry relied on it. And who controlled most of America's gasoline infrastructure? Not Rockefeller. Not anymore.
But the companies created from the ashes of Standard Oil, Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, Marathon, Amoco, Conoco, these companies now powered a new global economy, one driven not by kerosene lamps, but by combustion engines. Rockefeller had built the system. The world simply repurposed it. Refineries expanded. Tankers stretched across oceans. Pipelines crossed continents. Gas pumps replaced lanterns. Cars replaced carriages. And every time a car engine roared to life, part of Rockefeller's shadow moved with it. The empire he once led was now bigger than nations, and he wasn't even at the helm. For a man who once controlled 90% of America's oil, the most remarkable part of his legacy was this: he didn't need control anymore. The machine continued without him. His influence had become systemic, not personal. Rockefeller spent his mornings reading stock reports, smiling quietly as shares of the companies formed from Standard Oil kept climbing. He no longer strategized. He no longer negotiated. He no longer fought battles. He simply watched the world move on, fuel derived from the system he created, the system nobody could dismantle. But as he aged deeper into his 80s, then 90s, he began confronting a new truth. Money could build companies. It could build institutions. It could build pipelines, laboratories, universities. But money couldn't build time. Each year, Rockefeller moved slower, walked shorter distances, slept longer, rested more. Yet even in fragility, there was clarity. He had built two empires, one of oil, one of philanthropy, and both were designed with the same core belief: if you build the right system, the system will outlive you. His net worth, adjusted for modern values, surpassed $300 billion. His influence stretched across industries, medicine, education, energy, and global trade. He had become something more than a businessman. He was a force, an architect, shaping capitalism long after he stopped working. And as he looked back on his life, the chaos of oil, the battles over railroads, the courtroom wars, the philanthropy, he finally understood the truth. He hadn't just built Standard Oil. He had built an idea that efficiency creates power, that structure creates stability, that discipline creates empires, that systems, not individuals, shape the future. And America was built on systems. As Rockefeller entered his 90s, the world around him no longer resembled the one he had conquered. America had moved from lamps to bulbs, from carriages to automobiles, from isolated towns to a connected nation humming with electricity, engines, and ambition. And yet, beneath this modern world, his fingerprints remained.
Standard Oil, though broken, had become the foundation of global energy. Its descendant companies powered cities, armies, industries, and the rising American century. They shipped fuel across oceans, managed global pipelines, supplied factories during wars, and illuminated the world. Rockefeller no longer controlled them. He didn't need to. The system he built had matured into something autonomous, something inevitable. He spent his days in quiet routine, walking through manicured gardens, counting steps with the same precision he once applied to shipments and freight rates. He read financial statements every morning, not out of necessity, but out of habit. The numbers soothed him. They were the language he had spoken all his life. His health was fragile, but his mind remained sharp enough to understand one thing few businessmen ever grasp. Wealth that depends on one man is temporary. Wealth built on systems becomes immortal. He watched young industries flourish on the back of petroleum, aviation, manufacturing, chemicals, plastics, warfare, transportation. Entire global economies became dependent on oil. Nations negotiated treaties, fought battles, and built alliances around the very commodity he had once refined in his Cleveland factories. The world was living inside a framework Rockefeller had drawn more than half a century earlier. But beneath the pride, there was a quieter emotion, a surprising one: gratitude. Rockefeller, the relentless competitor, the master strategist, the man who once controlled 90% of an industry, now found joy in smaller things. Smiling at children who asked for dimes, sharing jokes with neighbors, listening to birds in the morning sun. handing out coins to strangers on his daily walks, not for charity, but for connection. He built an empire out of discipline, yet the final stage of his life was defined by simplicity. Still, even in simplicity, his financial instincts never dimmed. He tracked market trends. He predicted shifts in global demand. He understood supply chains decades before the term existed. He saw the future of oil long before most politicians or economists. He watched generations of businessmen rise and fall, some brilliant, some reckless, many believing they could outsmart the mechanics of the market. But Rockefeller knew better. Markets weren't ruled by personality. They weren't ruled by luck, size, or noise. They were ruled by system design, by the invisible, structured architecture beneath the surface. And this was his greatest insight. People chase money. Rockefeller built the blueprint that money follows. By the mid-1930s, Rockefeller's philanthropic empire had become as influential as Standard Oil once was. His foundation funded medical breakthroughs that eradicated diseases. It advanced scientific research, strengthened universities, modernized education, and shaped public health systems across the world.
The man who once brought the world kerosene now funded discoveries that would outlive petroleum itself. But there was one more realization waiting for him, a truth he carried in silence. Rockefeller understood that history judges men not only by the empires they build, but by the systems they leave behind. Standard Oil was gone. The Rockefeller Institute was thriving. His foundations were expanding globally. His descendants led corporations, banks, cultural institutions. He had become something rare, a man whose influence extended across generations he would never meet. As age drew closer to its final horizon, Rockefeller spent more time reflecting, quietly revisiting the years of struggle, ambition, victory, and controversy. He remembered the smell of crude oil on the early refinery floors, the thrill of perfecting efficiency, the cold negotiations with railroads, the courtroom battles that nearly broke him, the philanthropic victories that restored him, and the unexpected peace of his elderly years. He had been called many things: a visionary, a tyrant, a genius, a monopolist, a philanthropist, a villain, a savior. But labels never mattered to him, only results did. And the results were undeniable. America's modern economy, its highways, its cars, its factories, its military logistics, its global trade, all ran on the infrastructure and principles he pioneered. He hadn't just built wealth, he had engineered a new economic era. On May 23, 1937, at the age of 97, John D. Rockefeller passed away peacefully. There was no grand speech, no final message, just a quiet departure from a world he had reshaped. But the world he left behind was anything but quiet. Planes flew on fuel refined in networks he once designed. Cars filled their tanks with gasoline supplied by companies born from his empire. Research labs he funded saved millions of lives. Universities he built educated generations. Foundations he structured still operate today. And the mechanics of modern capitalism, consolidation, vertical integration, cost control, system design, all bear his signature. Rockefeller did not simply leave a legacy, he left a framework, a model, an architecture of power. Because the truth at the heart of his story is simple and profound. Empires fade, industries evolve, companies rise and fall, but systems endure. Rockefeller understood something few men ever do. If you master the system,
you master the industry. If you master the industry, you master the economy. And if you master the economy, you shape the future. He wasn't merely the world's first billionaire. He was the architect of America's first true money machine, a system so powerful, so precise, so deeply interwoven into the fabric of the modern world, that even breaking it apart made it stronger. And today, in a world still powered by the fuel he refined, still governed by the financial logic he shaped, still influenced by the corporate structures he pioneered, Rockefeller's shadow remains, not as a man, not as a myth, but as a system built on discipline, structure, efficiency, and vision, the blueprint of capitalism itself.